Good morning, friends. I am sitting here in Toronto, Canada, virtually with Raoul Bhaneja. Nice to finally meet you, Raoul.
Yeah, great to meet you too. Thanks for your interest in me and what I do.
I've been familiar with your work for some time. You are a multidisciplinary artist. You do theater, you do TV, film, and music. But for some of the folks that might be tuning in and are not familiar with your work, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Um, what made you go into all this array of arts?
Well, I'm an Irish, Indian, British-born Canadian. So I grew up in Ottawa, and I also lived in Germany for a little while as a kid. Um, yeah, I was always interested in performing and the arts. I don't really come from a family that did it professionally. I had both my granddads were kind of amateur theater people, but I never saw them do that or knew them doing that. But my grandfather in Delhi had was quite involved with the Sindhi community. That's my ethnic group on my dad's side. We're
Hmm.
from Sindh, which is now in Pakistan. But during the partition of India, my grandfather and everybody's family eventually moved to Delhi. And in
Right.
Delhi, he became involved a lot in kind of, you know, community cultural events and stuff trying to keep the language alive because the Sindhis are really are, I mean, they're a small minority in a giant country like India. And on my mother's side, I never met my grandfather. He passed away before I was born, but he was involved in the some of the amateur Dublin operatic societies.
Hmm.
And there was always quite a bit of music around my house. So I always I don't know. People sometimes say, "Isn't it weird that you sing jazz and blues and you do Shakespeare?" But to
Right.
me, I've always felt they're kind of the same.
Mm.
It's two sides of the same coin. It's not like they're that different. So sometimes people are surprised. Sometimes I'll be playing in a nightclub and someone will come in and go, "Hey, you're that guy from TV." And other times I'll be, a friend of mine will be, on stage. They'll walk into the club and they'll go, "Oh my God, Raul, I uh, I saw you on stage. Like, what's going on? Like, I don't understand. How come you do this?" So, that's I've just kind of quietly kept both those tracks running, and sometimes they cross and sometimes they don't. But yeah,
Hmm.
I studied classical. I'm a classically trained actor. I went to the National Theatre School, and I
Hmm.
graduated from there in the 90s, late mid 90s, 1996 to be precise. And then most of my career after that has been sort of mainly Toronto and then a bit Los Angeles back and forth over the years, trying to get it going in
For sure.
TV and film land. Yeah.
So you've been busy, and it sounds like it's in a way they ground each other, these sort of threads of, acting and music, would you say?
Yeah, well, it's funny because, my very first job out of school,
Hmm.
I did a collective creation at the Blythe Festival with, legendary director who would end up becoming a mentor of mine, Paul Thompson. Was one of the founders of Canadian theater. And we
Hmm.
created a show about a country music radio show that was in that part of Ontario. It was a
Right.
hit show called CKNX Barn Dance. And I thought, okay, here, or Barn Dance Live, it was called, about the CKNX Barn Dance. And
Right.
I showed up to Toronto and I was like, I'm here. And nobody gave a damn. So, a couple, 6, 8, 10 months of just at the very beginning of my acting career, trying to get stuff going. Slowly, I started gravitating back to playing music again, which I'd done in high school, but I had very little time for when I was at theater school. So I really started my music career because I needed to have a performance outlet in my life that I had much more control over. Because
Right.
of course, as an actor, you still I to this day, "Ooh, what text came in today?" You're waiting for the phone to ring. It's just the function of that thing. So
Hmm.
that began that kind of began a bit more of the it fed into my self-producing as a theater maker. It also
Right.
fed into my producing as a musician and making my own records and putting together my own band. I just felt to have opportunity, I needed to create it more for myself. And also, I realized how crazy it makes performers when you don't have a chance to perform.
Oh, for sure. I can only imagine, I'm on the other side enjoying the final products as they say, and I'm sure that there are days when you're just what's happening next.
Yeah,
Um,
it's definitely one of the tougher parts of the gig. I mean, we all know it. We all sign up for it. But you rarely find actors who have trouble with how much work they're doing. We usually
right,
have trouble with how much work we're not getting and not doing.
not doing. And then balancing out your music gigs too, which now it makes sense, the synergy between the two. So you continue to visit shows like Shakespeare's Hamlet, which is what we're going to talk about. And what is it about the Bard's work that kind of pulls you back in?
Well, just going back to the very, 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 very beginning, I was a founding member of a company in Ottawa
Hmm.
that was called a Company of Fools. That's still going today, believe it or not.
Hmm.
But when we started in 1990, believe it or not, 1990, I was in high school. But the co-founders, most of my fellow co-founders were either at the end of high school or were in university.
Hmm.
Margot McDonald, who's still an actor, Heather Joplin, who's performing too. Um, I was asked to join this group called Company Fools, and our mandate was to perform scenes from Shakespeare on the street, like
Mm.
buskers for
Right.
change. So I had a very early kind of exposure to this idea that Shakespeare was accessible and Shakespeare should be accessible and is kind of there for everyone. As much as I would later enjoy going to see show at Stratford or going to, or watching cinematic versions that were famous, uh, there was something very early on about these little scenes that we did everywhere for all kinds of people. I think we even did the very first Montreal Fringe, and
Hmm.
and it was a real grassroots kind of humble beginning to a relationship with Shakespeare. Of course, I studied it in school, and I was interested in being an actor. So and you got to remember for my generation of actor too, right around that time is when Kenneth Branagh releases his Henry V
Yes.
movie. And that
Mhm.
ends up being something that, it's I imagine it was kind of what it was like for people when they saw, Olivier's Henry V during the 1940s or his Hamlet shortly thereafter, where, you know, Shakespeare was much more in the mainstream. I mean, there's probably, there's Henry V came out at the same time around as the Oliver Stone movie Platoon about Vietnam. And there was
Yes.
this kind of like slow motion stuff. And so in popular culture, all of a sudden, there were these British guys on and gals on camera who we'd all come to know and love, Derek Jacobi, Judi Dench, Kenneth Branagh, the incredible Emma Thompson. They were doing Shakespeare on a popular level, on a giant level. And it was kind of
Hmm.
cool, or at least for us nerds, it was cool that it was
Right.
that accepted. So that kind of started me off. And then, of course, by the time I went to National Theatre School, at that point in particular, I'd say Shakespeare was a very important component of the training,
Of course.
and then I started going to watch shows at Stratford as a student in high school and both of that. And then, I had friends work there for the last 30 years. And I actually worked at the Dream in High Park in 1994, the summer of 1994. I was the front of house, assistant front of hill manager and concessions and merchandise manager for the Dream in High Park.
That's
Uh,
great.
when Jeanette Lambermont directed 12th Night. So I saw a bunch of great Toronto actors in that. I saw that every night, and I started to get a sense of like what the Shakespeare vibe was in the city of Toronto.
Hmm.
And yeah, I mean, later in my career in 2002, I was very lucky while I was working on Hamlet Solo in the very beginning stages. I
Right.
got to I got the Christopher Plummer International Fellowship Award where I got to go and be part of the an international company of actors for about 5 weeks at
Mm.
Shakespeare's Globe in London.
Nice.
And that was a very formative experience. The great Mark Rylance, has gone on to win Academy Awards. He
Mhm.
was running it still at that time. I was
Right.
kind of in charge of the program and a bit of a mentor to us, and I got to show him a little bit of my Hamlet solo work in progress. He'd played Hamlet at the RSC, so I've always just been really interested in it, and this particular version of my contribution to the big old Shakespeare pie It
Mhm.
started to take shape in school, but we really started workshopping it around 2001. And,
Right.
here we are, 2024. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, it's interesting the journey it's taken because I'm sure it's also evolved in some way. But, in terms of the play itself, Hamlet is very rich in terms of characters and language and themes. What can we tell folks who, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I didn't read Hamlet in school until way, way later because of a
Right.
film adaptation, like you said.
Yeah.
Although I am familiar with Shakespeare's other works, but what is it about the character of Hamlet or the play itself that is so, you know, applicable to whatever timeline that you're in?
Yeah. I mean, Shakespeare has gone in and out of style over the last 400 years, but it's pretty remarkable how long he has managed to stay
Mm-hmm.
relevant. And I mean, right now, and he's kind of being pushed out of the curriculum a little bit right now because people think it's colonial and that he's an old white guy and we got enough of him. And I have no problem with that in terms of we should be expanding the scope of classic work.
Exactly.
But also he's not a Confederate statue. Like we don't need to pull him down like he was Robert E. Lee. Like there's a way to kind of balance this out.
Mhm.
And so for me, one reason Hamlet has endured for all this time is because it's such a human story. And Shakespeare really wrote the blockbusters of his day. So he was amazing at writing plots, characters, and of course, he was a poet. And he spoke. I feel Hamlet is one of the early humanist dramas where, a
Mhm.
character comes out on stage and says, to be or not to be, basically, why are we here? Why do we exist? Peter Brook
Mhm.
has a comment that, the first line of Hamlet is, who's there? And the rest of the play is the answer,
Right.
which is kind of true. Who's there? Who is there? And so that has made it, I think, for besides it being a rip roaring revenge drama in the classic, absolute classic sense, you know, guy's dad dies, his uncle marries his mom, he finds out his uncle murdered his dad through a ghost and he has to kill him. Like that comes from an older kind of source material that Shakespeare used, and he did that a lot. So, but it's those it's it's the very human dynamic. And in our production, we really focus on that part of it because of course the full text, if you compile all the different drafts and versions that exist, that'd be 4.5 hours long.
For
We
sure.
focus we focus much more on the stories of the Hamlet family. So that's Hamlet, his mom, his uncle, his ghost dad, and
Hmm.
then we focus on the other family, which is Laertes, Polonius, and Ophelia, because
Right.
you've just got this one face doing all these people. So we kind of have those two families as sort of the central thing. And then there's these other characters that weave in and out, like Rosencrantz and
Yeah.
Guildenstern, or the guys on the
Mhm.
battlements. But that's kind of the familial aspect of it for us was really what we found the most
Mhm.
relevant for
And
us.
yeah, and thank you for sharing that because I actually have not seen your solo show, so I'm very curious about it. But I also was thinking about how do you focus on the language for each character because they have some interesting. I mean, Hamlet himself has a lot of great, like
Uh-huh.
lines and themes in the.
No, it's amazing to have, and if I go back to my English teacher, Jane Moore, who taught the director and the director and I both went to the same high school, Robert Ross Parker and I, in
Right.
Ottawa. So we had the same English teacher who turned us on to the play Hamlet in our final year of high school. We were 2 years apart, but we both had her teach us Hamlet.
Hmm.
And we both watched the version in class on television, Derek Jacobi's BBC version from 1980. We both watched that, and that was both our first Hamlet. Your first Hamlet's very important to you.
Sure.
So I, I had also been in a production of Hamlet at Neptune Theater in 2000. I played Laertes
Right.
opposite Tom Barnett, who
Hmm.
played Hamlet, and I also played the Player Queen. So I did have in my head when I started working on this, I did kind of have a production and voices and the way that it was done that was very familiar to me because I'd been in that production.
Right.
Of course, as an actor, I'd worked on different Hamlet speeches and worked on different bits as a young actor, as soliloquies and all that stuff. But it was this opportunity to use at least imaginative template of that original production. Now, some of those actors have seen my version, and I'm sure they can't see themselves in what I'm doing at all. But I was really influenced by what some of those actors did.
Sure.
Another thing Robert and I did, unlike what happens a lot, when you work on a play, people say like, oh, don't watch the movie of it. Don't watch another version of it. Just you have to focus on your version of it. But because we were compiling this sort of original take on it where I was going to be playing all the characters. I did a whole series of interviews with actors who played Hamlet, which was one thing. And then we watched and viewed every version we could find. And just took I almost couldn't even tell you now, oh, this bit's from that bit's from that. But imaginatively, we tried to look at every version and every take on it to help inform kind of how maybe different characters would be, what would be a little inspiration that would make Ophelia different from Hamlet, Laertes different from Polonius, But the other thing that we spent, we workshopped it. We didn't intend for it to take 5 years, but it was about 5 years of workshopping it.
Right.
On and off, of course, not straight through. And we started to develop a sort of style or methodology where we would think of it in cinematic terms. That instead of like, okay, I'm playing Ophelia, and now I walk over here and turn around and Hamlet looks at Ophelia, and then I walk back over here. Like you do that for 2 minutes and you realize, okay, this is like gonna, it sort of turns it into like a commedia dell'arte Lazzi. It turns it into almost like a Marx Brothers sketch.
Yes.
But when we started to think of it more like cutting, it cuts from one character to the other. Hamlet speaking, Claudius is speaking. Hamlet speaking, Claudius speaking, Polonius walks in.
Right.
Hamlet speaks, Claudius speaks. You start to think of it rhythmically that way. And it basically is always cutting from one to the other. As we developed that kind of cinematic choice, then it started to get easier because you realized, and of course, we had to test this out in production to see if it worked. But over time, we found that once the audience, like at any Shakespeare, tunes into it, takes a few minutes to just let your ears like, what's going on? Every Shakespeare play is like that. That's why he almost never has the title character or the title characters in his first scenes. He always has other people kind of set the world. Because if you were at Shakespeare's Globe in 1604, I guarantee you people were, there's no turning the lights down. They'd go, and then you'd start. But you wouldn't have everyone show up on time, everybody settle at time, everybody be quiet. It would take a moment. So once the audience ear is tuned, we've sort of found that people don't need as much of a change between them once they go, oh, that's Ophelia. Oh, that's Polonius.
Right.
And also Shakespeare being the clever guy that he was, and I think writing in the theater he was in, he writes a lot of cues in. Laertes, tell me what you're thinking right now. So then when this guy, when the person responds, there's a very high chance it's going to be Laertes unless he's interrupted. So I think that was one of the things we learned. And the crazy thing is, this should, and I completely understand why people would say, well, I can't come watch this. I don't know Hamlet. I don't know much about Shakespeare. The last thing I can do is sit there and watch some guy do it all on his own. Like I'll need the Cole's notes with me. I'll need to have a crash course in Hamlet before. But what we found paradoxically is that so many people have said to us that it's actually the clearest version of the play they've experienced. And in some ways they've understood it more than other versions because the focus is so much on the words and the story. And also, like reading a novel, the reader has to do a lot of imaginative work.
Exactly.
You, as the active audience member, start filling in the blanks. You're using your own imagination. Maybe you are creating battlements in your head. Maybe you're seeing mist around the ghost. Like you're doing your own kind of work to create the reality that we are proposing to you. And so it's weird. Like I get it. Like, and people might think I'm not telling them the truth, but trust me, if people didn't find it, enjoyable, but also clear, there's no way I would be still attempting to do this. Trust me. Like I only do it because people respond to it. I'm a bit of a masochist for doing this, but I wouldn't be doing this if at every night people were walking out and, throwing their programs at the stage going, I don't understand any of it. It's because people leave the theater feeling like they've still had the experience of Hamlet. And for some people, it's almost like going back to their first time of reading it or their first time of seeing it, which was one of our goals. What's that feeling when you first
Mm,
see it and you don't know how it's going to end? Because, of course, Shakespeare's audience didn't know how it was going to end. Most of them didn't.
mm,
Shakespeare never expected that 420 years from now, there'd be kids in Markham flipping through a script. Like, that was never on his mind. I don't know what he'd make of any of that. He
right.
made these things to be spoken and performed in front of an audience that is witness to the experience. That's it.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I was thinking when you were speaking about how the format of your show is very much like bare bones as it's described in
Mm-hmm.
different places. It makes sense, right? Because my experience in high school, I also had a great English teacher, Miss Patel, and it was about leaving time to, she would read to us. There were
Mm.
times in the classroom when we would, maybe not Shakespeare, other works, but it's always nice to have somebody else sort of tell the story while I get to go into that world. As you said, on my own terms, I'll add whatever things I want to add, or frankly, I just want to listen to the words. So I think experiences like this ones are really, it doesn't have to be Shakespeare. I think in general, they're immersive in other ways.
Yeah, and I don't think, particularly when you're talking about a playwright, I don't think any playwright writes their play to be read. They write it
Mhm.
to be acted. Whether
Right.
that was Arthur Miller or Henrik Ibsen or Judith Thompson, like the script is the guide for the actor to use to turn it into a thing, or for
Mhm.
the designer, the director. I'm not just saying exclusively the actor, but you know what I mean. Like
Oh,
it's
yes,
the
of course.
guide map for us to create the next level of it, the collective communal experience, the creative experience that
Mhm.
then happens on the stage live in front of an audience where we don't have the books in our hand, where we're not reading it. So I think in the sort of scholarly study of Shakespeare, too often there's not the resources or the kind of emphasis on how it needs to be performed to be experienced and understood in a different way. So
Mhm.
not a lot, but I've had experiences where I've been able to go into classrooms. I can't do the whole show for them, but maybe I'm in there for 45 minutes or an hour, and I can go into a high school class and go like, talk to them about my experience of making the show, but also do little sections for them and switch
Right.
between the characters. And I find that young audiences were always the ones who got it fast because they're used to things cutting. They're used to being on
Yes.
their phone and listening. They're like older people would say, well, there's no way these young people could understand what you're doing. I've got a PhD in Shakespeare. I could follow it clearly, but these kids had no idea. And then I'd ask them and they'd be like, no, 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 you were the dad then. And then you were the girlfriend. Yeah, I got it. I got it. Yeah. Phone, 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 phone.
Up on themes too, just as quickly, right?
Yeah. And
Mhm.
listen, when I go into a classroom, the easiest way to start is I go, okay, imagine this. Your dad dies and your uncle marries your mom. And everyone goes, oh,
Oh,
and you're like, great, there we go. Like we're start. That's
so
literally where
true.
we start.
It's so true. And I find that this story is like that. It kind of just gets you like that real quick, because there's
And
so much drama.
and I find because it's so much based around this sort of family dynamic, father, son, daughter, mother, father, daughter, husband, wife. It's very much a family. I mean, a lot of Shakespeare's plays are, but this one is so much about that
Yeah.
that's also, I think, a universal aspect to it that's allowed people to relate. The history plays are more complicated. It's about king
Mhm.
and subject, in the history scenes, when you do have in the history plays, when there are family scenes, those are the ones that usually we remember and grab onto because it's not
Mhm.
just about sort of historical political machinations. You're like, oh God, the father and the son are on the two opposite sides in the War of the Roses and they have to fight each other. Oh my God, that kind of thing. So you kind of can't lose with the family dynamic we found. And I think that's one reason why the plays endured.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like we've done like a mini class with you today. So this is like, I love it. I am like I'm back in.
Well, I'm only like Hamlet is I like to say I don't have a university degree, but I do think I have probably at the time I've spent on it, I think I have a PhD in
That,
solo Hamlet performance. That's it. I can't tell you about how to do a King Lear or a Two Gentlemen of Verona. I got no idea, but this I can tell you about.
no. I appreciate that because every time I talk to different folks about their theater work, I always learn something new, and I'm grateful for that in that sense. But I do want to remind people, like you said, you're not performing this Hamlet solo like all the time, and it's nice to hear the audience feedback as well. It's sort of drawing you back in. So you're actually coming back to Toronto for only 3 performances. How are you preparing for these 3 performances?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I first performed the show not too long after I'd had back surgery, a couple years after I had back surgery, but I was in my early 30s, and next month in June I'll be 50. So uh, it's a little different doing it as a slightly older actor because, of course, I did it a certain way and it had a certain kind of, attack to it. And, with age and experience, you start to figure out, oh, can I color this a little differently? So one of the things we're really lucky with it in the Soul Pepper run is we have like a good chunk of rehearsal time. So even though in a way I could do the show with 1 or 2 days notice if I really had to,
Sure.
but sometimes I don't have as much prep time because the engagement is shorter, or I'm not being paid to rehearse, or I'm doing a TV show and I fly in and I go do it and I leave. But at Soul Pepper, we're really lucky that we have this kind of ramp up. So, yesterday I ran it for about 5 people in the Soul Pepper staff in the rehearsal hall. Tomorrow I'll do a run for some George Brown students in the theater, but without any lights or anything, just in
Sure.
sort of in the semi-dark. And Tuesday night I'll have a dress rehearsal, and then I'll probably take Wednesday off, or on Wednesday we'll work on little bits, but I'll check in, see, okay, how's my neck, how's my feet, how's my voice,
Yes.
do I have a cold, is it allergies, so the first thing I start with a couple weeks in advance is I start walking around my neighborhood or wherever I am, running the lines and just trying to get them back in my, because it
Mhm.
starts with that. You have to have the lines right there.
Yeah.
And then as you add in and then the walking's good too, because you're used to kind of doing it at pace, so your heart's pumping and you're speaking and you're talking. And I mean, nowadays, I guess it probably doesn't seem that weird to see a guy walk around the neighborhood talking to himself. But if any of my neighbors see me, I'm probably running Hamlet lines, or it looks like I'm on the phone. So that's fine.
True.
And then you add in, doing it on its feet in the space, trying to figure out like, okay, because we don't have a set.
Right.
The set is the room we do the show in. I've done it outside in a park. I've done it in like an art gallery. I've done it in a 200-seat theater. I've done it in an 800-seat theater. I've done it in a 60-seat theater. So it's always about the room we're in doing it. How do we tailor this version for this room? And how does that change what we do?
Yes.
The pattern where we walk, a lot of that's kind of the same. But because it's such a crazy, rich play, Robert and I still, all these years, and I'm also lucky that in this engagement, Robert's come from New York to direct me again.
Nice.
I
Yeah.
often have him with me, but not always. Sometimes I'm just going out to go do it. But when I have this rehearsal window, even though I'm sure he's, some days he's just stunned, bored looking at me do this over and over again. It's a long time to watch somebody. Not many directors in the world will have watched one actor over 23, 24 years struggle through this thing. But it's a great gift to me because we're still discovering new things. We'll still go, oh yeah, yeah, I wonder if this section is actually this. Why don't we try that? So it's such a rich piece. We're constantly finding new things. And then of course, like great theater, every time you do it, every room you do it in, every city you do it in, you get a different kind of feeling off it. So I'm just very lucky. When I interviewed all those actors who played Hamlet, Christopher Plummer, John Neville, the late Brent Carver, Paul Gross, when I talked to all of them, almost all of them said, if I could play the part again, I'd do it tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Christopher Plummer was probably in his 70s at that point when I interviewed him, and he was like, oh, I'd do it tomorrow if I could. So I realized how lucky I am, not just to play Hamlet, but to to get to dive back into the rich world of this play
Mhm.
is my own doing, because of course
Sure.
I'm, I created this and I produced it, and but on the other hand, the fact that anybody wants to come see it or you can make a bit of money doing it, that's the honor for me, because we don't often have a chance as performers, particularly in our system here. We don't have these European rep systems where you might see
Mhm.
an actor work on the same play for 10 years, 15 years, play the same role, come in and out. I've kind of created that a bit unintentionally for myself, to have the chance to come back with new life experience as an actor, and hopefully, some more intelligence and emotional intelligence and skill and finesse to come back to it again, and confidence to come back to it, and hopefully for the audience, it also becomes richer for them to watch when they see someone who's had a chance to sit with something for so long.
Yeah, I think that's probably going to be what you're going to get back as well, coming back to Toronto.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much. We could speak for another hour, but I'm mindful of our time. I hope you get to enjoy the long weekend before you continue preparing.
Yeah, well, the 2 runs this weekend, but yeah, in the old days I would have done 4. And now it's like, slow down. It's okay. We don't got to overdo it here. There's no point screaming this to an empty room. Like, let's just work on it. So
Nice.
no, thanks. And yeah, it's May coming up very soon. May 23rd, 24th, 25th. Only those 3 performances. But one thing I did want to mention is that
Yeah.
Soul Pepper just released in the side balcony $36 seats, because of course the seats are expensive. There
Yeah.
will probably be rush tickets the day of. There will be some arts worker tickets available,
Yeah.
but all 3 performances now have those, and they're sold as restricted view. But I would just let people know that because of the nature of this show,
It's not really.
you're never not going to see me for too long. I don't go do a whole section. I don't go do 10 minutes where you can't see me. It's just not like that show. Most of it happens on the stage. So
Okay.
that was exciting, because more people can come who can maybe afford it now, which is great.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you
Yeah.
again for sharing of your work with us.
Thanks for having me.